So, all right, we're back. All right, time to do the top 99. We've already done 130 all the way up to 100. So let's do 99 and go from there. All right. So 99 is a film directed by Neil Jordan from 1992, and it's called The Crying Game. All right. So this film is kind of a double story. You think it's one kind of film when you first started watching it, but then it turns into a whole different kind of film by the end. And it's really interesting that turn. All right. So basically, this film opens and you think it's a film about the IRA and British intelligence or British Army and the fight between the two. Because what happens at the beginning is an IRA cell kidnap or capture a British soldier who's played by Forrest Whitaker, and his name in the film, I have it here. So his name is Jody. All right. So Jody gets captured by the IRA, and he's tied up in a cabin, and a guy named Fergus, who's part of the IRA, is left there to watch him, and they issue a statement. The IRA issues a statement saying that they want a certain prisoner of war, an IRA member, to be released, and they'll release this British soldier. Otherwise, in 3 days, they're going to kill this British soldier. All right. So 3 days pass and nothing's happened. So the the head honcho of the IRA cell tells Fergus to kill Jody. All right. So what he does is he brings him back into the woods, but then Jody tries to escape, and he actually almost escapes. But what happens is he goes out of the forest onto a road, and one of his own vehicles end up running over and killing him. Right. So then Fergus escapes. Now when the first part of the film is Fergus and Jody in the cabin, and they kind of bond over conversation, right? And Jody has an idea that he's probably going to die because he doesn't think the British government's going to release that prisoner for him. So he makes Fergus promise that he'll go tell his wife what happened to him, okay? And his wife lives in London or whatever, right? So anyway, so he ends up dying because he gets hit by a transport vehicle, like a British Army transport vehicle on the road. And then Jody escapes, and he escapes, and he goes to London under a different name. He calls himself Jimmy, right? So he ends up meeting or visiting Jody's wife, all right? And they end up getting involved. And that's as far as I'm going to go with the story, all right? Because after that, if I tell you any more, I'm just going to wreck the story for you. But basically, this film you think is about the war between the British and the Irish and the IRA, but it's actually something else. And the other thing that it is a very powerful message and story. And anyways, I can't ruin it for you. All right, so it's called The Crying Game, directed by Neil Jordan. Neil Jordan doesn't have any other films. I mean, he has a lot of good films, but not like top 130 great films, unlike this one, right? So this is his best film, and it actually didn't do well when it first came out, but then it didn't do well in Ireland and England, but then they released it in the United States, and then it just blew up, and Canada and the United States really warmed up to the film, and it actually was nominated for like 5 or 6 Oscars, and it won Best Screenplay, if I remember correctly. So this is a really good film, and it deserves to be in the top 100. It's number 99, directed by Neil Jordan, The Crying Game from 1992. All right, so next up after that is number 98, and this film is called Sleeper, and it's from 1973, and it's Woody Allen. It's my favorite Woody Allen film. A lot of people would probably, you know, uh, Manhattan or Annie Hall, maybe Hannah and her sisters, crimes or and misdemeanors. But basically, most of Woody Allen's films have a bit of humor in it because he's a humorous guy, right? And he plays that self-deprecating Jewish man really well, right? In a lot of his films, like that stereotypical neurotic Jewish man, right? So, and it's very attractive on film. It you know endears it endears him to you when you're watching the film. And a lot of his films are about romance, all surrounding New York. Like he's most famous for using like the city of New York as an extra character in his film. So you have the main characters, but you also have the New York, the feel of New York kind of invades his films or becomes part of his films, right? So they're quite expressive. But the thing about Woody Allen that I liked mostly is his more of his farcical type of side. He's got this a reincarnation of Charlie Chaplin type of thing in a few of his films, right? And the one film that he does that the best is in Sleeper, right? So in Sleeper, he's basically a man from the 1970s, and he gets put in like a pod and chronologically frozen. Then he wakes up in the future because people forget about him. Then they find his coffin or whatever you want to call it, his suspension chamber, and they unfreeze him and let him up, and then he's like way into the future. And this future is quite funny. He ends up like joining this terrorist type of group that's fighting against this government. But anyways, it's quite funny, and the silver ball that's in it, and the phone booth, the sex phone booth, and him running around like he's a robot in disguise, and the big huge vegetables and everything. Anyways, it's when I watched it, I don't know if I was in a certain mood or not, but that just struck me as one of the most hilarious films I've ever seen in my life, and I've always enjoyed it since. And I've watched numerous Woody Allen films, and none of them have lived up to that first Woody Allen experience. Even though like maybe Annie Hall is probably his greatest film. Most people will consider maybe Annie Hall as his greatest film, but he has so many really good films, right? I will always think that Sleeper is his best film. That's why I listed it. Now, like I said, he has a lot of films that you could put in a top 100 list and nobody would really bat an eye. Now, there's some negativeness towards Woody Allen because of his marrying his ex-wife's adopted daughter, but it doesn't detract the, from the greatness of his films. Now, whether you want to support Woody Allen because of his behavior, I mean, he didn't really do anything illegal, did he? Maybe a little bit immoral, depending on what your morality is. But his films just stand on their own. And here are a list of his films. Any one of them you could put into a top 100, 130 list, and it wouldn't look out of place. And those are Play It Again, Sam. That one's from 1972. Love and Death from 1975. All right. Annie Hall, which many consider his greatest film. All right. From 1977. Manhattan, another one that a lot of people cite as one of his great films from 1979. Zelig uh, from 1983. The Purple Rose of Cairo from 1985. Hannah and Her Sisters from 1986. Crimes and Misdemeanors from 1989. And Husbands and Wives from 1992. All of those films, great films. All right. So he's a great director. He's one of United States greatest directors in the history of film, right? And no wonder, look how many great films I just listed from him, right? Now, some people are pushed off from Woody Allen because of that certain quirkiness that he has in his films, but most people just adore the man and adore the films that he makes, right? I don't know if they adore the man anymore, but his films are quite charming, all right? And it is quite beautiful. If you really want to watch some entertainment, relationships, and a visual representation of the people and of the culture and city of New York through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, then Woody Allen is your guy. All right. All right. So that's Woody Allen. Sleeper from 1973, and it's number 98. All right. So next up is my all-time favorite romantic comedy. All right. There are some really good romantic comedies, but I'm a guy, and most romantic comedies aren't really attractive to me, but there are some that you know jump over the fence and become charming to me, like Love Actually, or Love Actually is an extremely good film. And what's another one? Saving say Forgetting Sarah Marshall. That one was a very good film as well, but that's from a guy's perspective. That's probably why that one is would be in my list of see my voice be in the list of you know some of my favorite romantic comedies, right? So, but this one is my all-time favorite. It's from 1989. It's directed by Rob Reiner. It's called When Harry Met Sally, and basically this film is really good because of two reasons. One is it takes throughout the whole film for Harry and Sally to actually get together, and they're not around each other for long periods of time in this film. Like they first meet because they graduated university, and Harry is actually dating one of Sally's girlfriends, and they're both going to New York because Harry has a job there, and Sally has a job there as well, I think, after graduation, right? So they decide to carpool and they go and they become kind of friends, but not really friends because Harry thinks that men and women can't be friends, right? Men and women can only date or marry or anything like that because they can't be like platonic friends because of the sex thing, right? So anyway, so they get to New York, and Harry is the type of guy that pisses women off, right? And so he kind of pissed Meg off, and she no longer wants to be around him, right? So then like another 5 years goes by, and then they end up seeing each other again, meeting each other again, because I think Harry is dating again another friend of Sally's. Anyways, what happens is like 3 or 4 times they end up meeting and then disappearing from each other's lives for a number of years until finally, like maybe 10 or 15 years after they first met when they were driving to New York, they finally fall in love and get together, right? So that's one of the charming things about this film that makes it a little bit different than most romantic comedies. Usually it's man and woman date, they get really serious, and then some sort of breakup or some guy or girl gets involved in it to break them up, and then they realize that they can't live without each other, and the guy runs to the airport or whatever, right? So this one is more like they like each other, but they don't like each other, and then they never see each other for 5 years, and then time goes by, and it takes like till they're in their late 20s, early 30s to finally you know get together, right? And what's also charming is then this is the second thing, is that you have like these like interludes where they show these married couples, like older, younger married couples, on how they met and how they've been together for 50 years or whatever, right? And it's really, really charming, right? And those stories, although they're done by actors who are acting in these, it's like an interview where you're sitting behind the camera and there's your wife and you're talking about your marriage and how long you've been married and done, right? And it's really charming. But the actual stories are real, so that's adds another element to this film that makes it better than the average romantic comedy, right? So it's When Harry Met Sally from 1989, directed by Rob Reiner, and Rob Reiner is a very good director, and there would be other of his films that could make the top 100 pretty easily, and I'll tell you what they are. First would be This Is Spinal Tap from 1984. That was a hilarious film. All right, Stand By Me. Um, a bunch of kids. This is like a Stephen King story. They uh, they go out to look at a dead body, and everything changes. The Princess Bride from 1987. Misery. I am your I'm your all-time favorite fan. Right, that was a pretty spooky film. It also was a Stephen King book, and from 1990, and A Few Good Men from 1992. You can't handle the truth. That will always be you know burned into your skull if you've ever seen that movie, right? So anyway, so those are the films that if you would put in the top 100, I don't think anybody would have an issue with from Rob Reiner, right? But the one that I put in was When Harry Met Sally from 1989, directed by Rob Reiner. It's number 97 on the list. All right, so next up is number 96 on the list, and this is a film directed by Hector Ababenko, and it is called Kiss of the Spider Woman, and it's from 1985. Now, this is a prison film, and it's basically about two men in a prison cell having a conversation. All right, and it stars Raul Julia and William Hurt, and Raul Julia plays this revolutionary leftist um, prisoner, political prisoner, and in the cell with him is a homosexual man played by William Hurt. Now, basically, it's a dialogue. The William Hurt character, his name is Molina, and the Raul Julia character is named Valentin. And so Molina basically recounts a movie that he really likes to pass the time with Valentin. But what happens is you see there becomes a bonding between these two men who are stuck in this cell, right? And it's exploring, a prison nature, sexuality in prison, and that kind of thing is kind of like a side but center of this film, right? So basically the two fall in love with each other. But what the Valentin character doesn't understand is Molina was put in his cell on purpose to try to get information from Valentin about his group of terrorists or whatever that are fighting against the government. Now they're in a Brazilian jail, so this is during the military dictatorship in the 60s in Brazil, right? So, but what happens is they fall in love, they consummate this love that they have, and then Valentin gives Molina a phone number to go call his revolutionary brothers and give him some information that Valentin gave him, right? But, the secret police are following him. Anyways, it's quite a powerful film. It's about political violence. It's about, relationships, prison life, homosexuality, has all this interest in it. And basically, it probably didn't cost very much to make because basically 90% of this film takes place inside a cell, and it's all basically dialogue, right? So those are the most difficult films to watch or be good and entertaining enough to watch. And when it is pulled off, they become some of the greatest films ever made, right? Because you're not covering up anything with a lot of action or a lot of guns or a lot of police chases or a lot of racing around the city and action and all that to cover up you know uh, a boring script or whatever, or a a lackluster script. When you're doing it's almost like it's a play, right? It's actually a book, but um, it's almost like it's a play where there's nowhere to hide. You either have great dialogue, you have great drama in this film, or it's gonna bomb, right? So this is a great film, number 96 on my list. Kiss of the Spider Woman from 1985, directed by Hector Babenco. Now, Hector Babenco has one other film that many people probably think is even better than The Kiss of the Spider Woman, and that is Exopte, The Law of the Weak, is from 1980. So it was a film that Babenco made 5 years earlier. All right, and it's quite a powerful film as well. But those are the two films that I would have no issue if I saw them on a list, top 100 list, right? So, all right, so that's number 96. All right, so next up is a film from 2003. It was directed by Gus Van Sant, and it's called Elephant. All right, and this is number 95 on the list. And this film is basically almost like a reenactment of the Columbine shootings, the high school shootings in Columbine. Um, Basically, Gus Van Sant, I think, saw that and decided to do a dramatization of it. You know, some people may call it exploitation of that tragedy. Other people may call it like a visual. Like if I was to get into Gus Van Zant's head and I saw that the Columbine massacre, right, where uh, two kids went into Columbine High School and started shooting everybody, right? That would be like something you would see on the news, but obviously they're not going to show any of that footage if there was footage, which there wasn't. But anyways, they can just tell you what happened, right? So when you're outraged by it and everything, and you're wondering why the Americans don't have gun laws like the rest of the world does. You know what I mean? And why this type of thing happens so much more often in the United States than anywhere else in the world. Now, Gus Van Sant, I think, heard that story and basically decided to create a movie that basically goes through pretty much the Columbine massacre. I don't know if it's exactly the same, probably not. But basically, some people may look at that like, you know, exploitive, saying, "Oh, he's just trying to make money off of a tragedy," right? But when I watched that film, what came across to me was that he wanted people to understand exactly, almost on a visceral level, on emotional level, not on just a news. Oh, well, that's kind of like a tragedy. No, he wanted you to experience it as if you were there, right? So what he does is he follows around with a camera the two boys that go to the high school and their preparations for and then their execution of a massacre in the high school, and he wanted you to experience that like you were a bystander, right? Like you were in there with it, right? And it's an extremely powerful film, and I don't know if a lot of people can stomach it. Um, it may like fuck you up if you watch this film because it's that powerful, right? And but after you watch that film, if you weren't, anti-assault rifle or anything else in the United States, and you can see, I think he could have done a little bit more to it, as in, let's say, the boys that go into the high school and kill 14 kids. What he did was concentrate on those two boys and the reasons why they were doing it or whatever. What he could have done was he could have, developed the personalities and the characters of the ones that end up getting shot, right? And that would have been even more powerful, as in, follow the students that end up dying at the end of the film from being gunned down, and show them, their family, what their interests are, and everything else. Like a drama or whatever. Like follow John, whoever, home from school, and his best buddy is this guy, and they like to go skateboarding at the local park and da da da. Give a human face to these statistics, right? And then if you saw them get shot, then you would realize the pain, if you're not a parent, or if you are a parent, the pain that parents would have to go through because of that. There's nothing worse to survive, all right, um, that I can think of than, or I can imagine, than the death of your child for no reason, right? There's, you know, it just fucks you up, right? I don't know. Maybe being in a prisoner camp and being tortured is something worse, but um, I don't think there's anything as hurtful or damaging to you than the loss of a child, right? And if Gus Van Sant ended up making you have a connection with the children or the teens that are in this school before those two other students come in and shoot the hell out of everybody, I think you would even have a more visceral, the point that he was trying to make, a more visceral reaction to it, and maybe that would kind of spur you on or others on to, you know, well, maybe not. The Americans are just, that Second Amendment is just, it's like, don't take away my guns or whatever, right? You know what I mean? It's just, anyways. This is an extremely powerful film, and if you can make it through it, it will psychologically damage you a bit, at least in my opinion, and it will open your eyes to what something like that actually, if you were to experience it, what, do you understand what I mean? He brings you right through the whole thing, right? So almost documentary style, right? But you're walking around with these students with the weapons, and you're seeing what they're doing. It's like you're a bystander or the person with the camera, right? So, anyways, it's a powerful film, and it deserves to be on this list. And it's number 95. It's from 2003. It's called Elephant, and it's from Gus Van Sant. Right now, Gus Van Sant is a very good director. So there's other films that could make the top 100 list, and those would be Drugstore Cowboy from 1989, um, My Own Private Idaho from 1991, and Good Will Hunting from 1997. Any of those four films in the top 100 would have no issue with me. All right, so next up, number 94 is a Bruce Lee film. Got to have a Bruce Lee film in your top 130, right? And this one is Enter the Dragon. It's from 1973, and it's directed by Robert Klaus. All right. And Robert Klaus also directed Game of Death from 1978. So it's kind of a flip between those two. Which one is better? Which one shows off, the martial arts skills of Bruce Lee better? Is it Enter the Dragon or is it Game of Death? Right. So either one would have been fine. And I don't really have to talk about these films. Almost everybody who likes action films have probably seen either one of these films. It would probably just bore you, right? You already know what's going on in these two films, right? So next up is another all-time favorite, kind of like a romantic comedy film. This one is a British film from 1980, directed by Bill Forsyth, and it's called Gregory's Girl. Now, this one, along with Some Kind of Wonderful, maybe Fast Times at Ridgemont High, but that's a whole different animal, like Porky's or let's say the Last American Version. This one is like a 10 on 10 for charm. All right. So basically, the story of Gregory's Girl is there's this guy named Gregory who really likes this girl who's a soccer player in his school. All right. And so he gets the guts to ask her out on a date. And I've always enjoyed that kind of film where you get, because he's a geeky looking guy, all right? He's not like Tom Cruise or anything, right? He's a geeky looking guy. And he gets the courage, the intestinal fortitude to ask this pretty girl who's on the soccer team out on a date. Now she says yes, all right? So he's all excited and he goes out on the date. So she tells him to meet her at this place. So he goes to that place. And when he arrives at that place, she's not there. There's another girl who's a friend of hers that is there. And she tells him, okay, let's go for a walk. And they end up going to like a chip stand or whatever and get some French fries or whatever. And then he ends up getting passed off from her to another girl. And then they do some walking. And then he gets passed off from her to another girl. I can't remember how many girls he gets past. Is it three? I think it's three girls. And then finally he ends up being with a girl in the last part, and she's the one that you see that really likes Gregory, right? So, and then Gregory, you know, for totally forgets about the other girls and the original girl that he asked out because he sees there's this girl in front of him that really likes him, and it makes him feel good and it makes him feel attracted to her or whatever, right? In the end, basically, it was like a group of girls who got together to point Gregory towards the girl that he should be asking out because this is the girl that really likes him, not the other ones, right? So, anyways, it's a very charming film. I don't know if you would think of something like that as manipulative or charming, right? But I found it really charming. Like, guys when in their teens are just all stupid, right? And, all full of hormones and they don't know what they like, right? But, you know, he's he's got the guts to try it out and he's rewarded for it, right? So it's good. So if you're like a high school student and you really like a girl but you don't want to ask her out because you have this inferiority complex or you don't think you're good enough or you don't think you have enough money or are attractive enough or whatever, right? What you should be doing basically is not going after some fantasy that you have. You should be looking around and because women, despite what you hear, in whatever social media you're talking about, you don't really have the control of this. All right, men don't have any control over what women they date, right? The man makes the approach, but it's the woman that makes the decision, right? So it's all the power is all with women. It's their decision whether they'll date you or not, right? So you're the one that has to ask. So I mean, if you're smart, you should have your radar on all women, right? You understand what I mean? You should be looking around for all women, seeing the signs of. You shouldn't be restricting yourself to this one that's way up at the top and might not be right for you anyways. You should be looking around and seeing which girls seem to like you as well and think about them as well, right? So, but anyways, it's a really charming film, and it's called Gregory's Girl. It's from 1980, and it's by Bill Forsyth. Now, Bill Forsyth made two other films that were really good as well, and those two films are, sorry, uh, Local Hero from 1983 and Housekeeping from 1987. So either of those two films, but Gregory's Girl is his film. There's actually a sequel to this, but I haven't been able to find the sequel to Gregory's Girl, and it's probably disappointing. It probably doesn't have the charm that, but it's like 20 years later or something. Like we go back into Gregory's life 20 years after, 10 years after, 15 years after. Anyway, anyways, it's Gregory's Girl from 1980, and it's directed by Bill Forsyth. It's number 93 on my list. All right. Okay, next up is a film from 2004, directed by Alexander Payne. It stars Paul Giamatti. Who else does it star? Who's the other guy? Who's the main guy? Sandra Oh is in this. Yeah, Thomas Hayden Church. All right. So basically, this film is called Sideways, and it's basically about two guys that go to California wine country on a vacation just before one of them is to get married, right? So you have Jack, who's the guy that's going to get married, who's played by Thomas Hayden Church, and Paul Giamatti, who plays his friend Miles. Now, Miles is a failed writer who writes and gets turned down. His manuscripts get turned down. So what he does for money is he teaches, right? Jack is a what is he? He's like an actor. He does voice acting and stuff, right? So he's going to get married. So Jack and Miles decide to go on a wine trip through wine country, and that's what they do, and they end up meeting up. Now Jack's main point of going isn't to taste wine, is to go get laid before he gets married, right? And he ends up meeting up with Sandra Oh, yeah, the girl from Grey's Anatomy, Sandra Oh, the Canadian, um, and they kind of have a fling or whatever, and Miles meets up with her friend, and they kind of have a fling as well. But basically, this is the type of film. I don't want to get into the whole detail of the film. This is the type of film that you would. It's like Gosford Park. Remember Gosford Park? I listed it. It's a type of film that when you, let's say, you read the back of the film, you go, okay, it's about two guys going into wine country. That sounds kind of boring. I don't really want to watch that. It would kind of go under the radar, right? But then one day you say, okay, I'll watch this film or whatever, because people keep saying this is a very good film, but I don't know how it can be a good film. It sounds boring, right? But then you watch it and you're friggin' blown away by it, right? So it's an extremely good film. It's funny. It's kind of like a romantic comedy, but it's more of a trip into wine country. And anyways, I don't want to ruin it for you. It's quite a fun film, and it's Payne does a really good job. Let's put it that way. And Giamatti is a great actor. He's in the line. Uh, so this is Sideways. All right, it's a great film. If you haven't seen it, pick it up and watch it. You won't be disappointed. It's from 2004 and directed by Alexander Payne. Now, Alexander Payne has one other film that many people consider as great, and if it was in the top 100 instead of Sideways, it wouldn't look weird at all, and that's Nebraska from 2013. All right, so Sideways, 2004, Alexander Payne. All right, number 92 on the list. Okay, so next up is a Canadian film from 2005, directed by Jean-Marc Vallée, and it's called Crazy, but it's crazy with periods between each letter. All right. And this basically is one of the greatest Canadian films of all time. And it's one of the greatest Quebecois films of all time. And it tells a story like back in the 60s and 70s, takes place in the 60s and 70s in Quebec. And it's a coming of age film about a boy, a teenager. He's got like four brothers, and it's a big, francophone family. And he's a gay boy, right? He's a you know, so that wasn't as easily accepted, especially in Quebec, because Quebec was so dominated by the Roman Catholic Church, right? So um, for the longest time, until had the Quiet Revolution back in the 60s and 70s. During this time, so he's coming of age in a time period where Quebec is transitioning from the domination of the Roman Catholic Church to a more open and free society. and he's coming out as homosexual. But homosexuality wasn't really seriously accepted by large amounts of people, until like the 90s or early 2000s, right? So in the 60s and 70s, you're going to be putting up with a lot of BS if you're gay, right? And so it takes on all of that, and it's extreme. It's funny at times. It's endearing at times. It's just a whole gambit of emotions you'll feel when you watch this film. Now it is in French, so you'll be watching it with English subtitles if you don't speak French. Even so, it's a great film, all right, and it's number 91 on my list, and it's from Jean-Marc Vallée. Now, Jean-Marc Vallée doesn't have any other films that reach the height of crazy. This is the only film that from him would be in the top 100. It's from 2005, and it's number 91 on my list. Okay, so next up is number 90 on the list, and this is a film from 1951, directed by Vincente Minnelli, and it's called American in Paris, and stars Gene Kelly. And basically, this is a musical and dance film that shows off Gene Kelly's dance skills and Gershwin's musical talent. All right, so basically, the music is done by Gershwin, and the dance numbers and the choreography are done by Gene Kelly. And it's a really good film. It's really enjoyable. It's funny at times. It's beautifully made. The cinematography on this film is like it must have blown everybody away back in that day, because when I watched this film on Blu-ray, the color schemes of the dance scenes and everything else, quite beautiful to watch. And Gene Kelly is his charming self in this film. So he's an American in Paris, and he's trying to become a considered artist. And then there's this rich woman who's attracted to him, who takes him under her wing because he knows the art scene in Paris, and she likes his paintings and stuff. But anyways, there's more complicated than that, but it's interdispersed. The drama is interdispersed. The romance is interdispersed with Gene Kelly, you know, dancing and singing, right? So, and like I said, the colors, it's bright, vivid colors in this film. And from a film from 1951, it really blows you away on how beautiful it is, right? So that's why I chose this film to be in my top 100. And Minnelli is one of the great directors, 40s and 50s. Minnelli is one of the greats. So other Minnelli films that could make the top 100 are, let's see, Meet Me in St. Louis from 1944. All right. The Bad and the Beautiful from 1952. The Bandwagon from 1953. Tea and Sympathy from 1956. Some Came Running from 1958. And Home from the Hill from 1960. So you get this. There's like one, two, three, six other films, seven if you include American Paris, that you could choose from to put in the top 100 list, right? So Minnelli is a filmmaker that you should explore, all right? And he is the father of Lisa Minnelli as well, right? Anyway, so all right, so that's an American Paris from Vincent Minnelli from 1951, number 90 on the list. Number 89 on the list is one of my all-time favorite American filmmakers, and that's Brian De Palma. He had a film from 1984 called Body Double, and it's my all-time favorite film by Brian De Palma, and it's number 89 on the list. I should really move that one up higher, but I guess 89 is good, but it could be higher. Anyway, so Brian De Palma is one of the great American directors. He was a huge fan of Alfred Hitchcock, and Alfred Hitchcock's filmmaking style is you can see that influence on a lot of De Palma's films. Now, a lot of people would pick maybe Scarface as De Palma's greatest film, maybe Dress to Kill, maybe Carrie, but the one that I enjoy the most is the one that's most like an Alfred Hitchcock film, like his ode to Alfred Hitchcock, and that film is Body Double. And this is a really, really good film, and it's basically the twist in it is really good, and this is one of Melanie Griffith's earliest film, if not her first film, and she plays a stripper in it, and she is extremely funny in this film, right? She's not, the smartest person in the film, and she really plays that well. You know what I mean? Melanie Griffith is a very smart woman, and how she plays the character in this film, like how everything's just so overwhelming, right? And anyways, she thinks everybody's a pervert. Anyways, it's quite funny. But basically, the premise of this film is a guy wants to commit a murder of his wife, but he doesn't want to get caught. So he sets up an actor to watch the murder of his wife done by uh, a Native American, right? But it actually isn't a Native American. But I don't want to ruin the film for you. It is quite a fun film, and it is like a Alfred Hitchcock film. It's got that whole element of Alfred Hitchcock in it, and it's really a great film. Um, but like I said, it's underappreciated. If you're going to think of the film that everybody picks when it comes to Brian De Palma, it's always Scarface. Now, Brian De Palma is a great filmmaker. Any of these films that I'm about to list making the top 100 uh, wouldn't look at a place at all, and that's Phantom of Paradise from 1974, Carrie from 1976, which is another Stephen King story, right? Dress to Kill from 1980, Blowout from 1981, Scarface from 1983, which is usually named as the De Palma's best film, right? Casualties of War from 1989, Michael J. Fox, Sean Penn film, um, and Carlito's Way from 1993. All right, so any of those films making the top 100, not out of place at all, right? Okay, so that's Body Double from Brian De Palma from 1984. This number 89 on the list. All right. Next up is number 88, and this film is a Japanese film by Kinji Fukasaku. All right, Fukasaku. Hopefully, I'm not brutalizing his name. If I am, I apologize. All right, and this film is from 2000. It's called Battle Royal. All right, and this film, I watched this film not because Fukasaku directed it, but because Takeshi Kitano is in this film, and he's a great actor and he's a great director as well. He'll be on my list in this film. In this list will be Kitano will be in it, but here he plays an actor. He plays a teacher, and basically this film is about a group of teachers who bring all their students onto an island because and they say to their students, listen, you guys are back talking, you have no respect for authority or for your elders, and that's not the Japanese way, so we're going to teach you a lesson. And basically, this island is basically where you're going to fight it out to see if you really want to live, right? All right, so basically, the premise they put them all on the island, and basically, they have to fight for their lives against every other student, right? So basically, it's a battle royal, right? And it's quite a fun film. It's kind of disgusting and gross at times and everything, but it's that you know oh, you want to back talk to your teacher, like, you know what I mean? I wonder if this film is just like a fantasy of some teachers who have teenagers that just don't respect them, right? It's like, oh man, I wish I could bring you onto an island, just let you guys rip each other apart, see who survives, right? That kind of thing. So it's quite a fun film if you don't mind English subtitles from a Japanese script. It's it's a really it's a really fun murder fest. Let's put it that way. All right, so that's Battle Royale. Now, Kinji Fukasaku is a very good director as well, and he has other films that could make this list, right? So, Sympathy for the Underdog from 1971, all right, that's one of his earlier films. Under the Flag of the Rising Sun, another 1970 film from 1972. Battles Without Honor and Humanity from 1973, and there's a bunch of uh, sequel sequels to that film of Battles Without Honor. Um, any of those films as well. I think there's four of them, if I remember correctly, but don't quote me on that. So those films could have made this list as well, right? All right. So that's number 88, Battle Royal from 2000, directed by Kinji Fukasaku. All right. Next up is a French film directed by Jean-Jacques Annaud. All right. And this is from 1981, and this is a film called Quest for Fire. Now, this film there's no talking in it. Well, there's grunting and gestures and things like that, but there's actually no speech, right? Well, very little. And basically, it's about a Neanderthal. I think it's a Neanderthal tribe that. So this film takes place before humans come along, and basically, it's at a time period in Homo sapiens' lives or their ancestors where fire is invented, but the only way that they get fire is through like you know uh electricity strikes, lightning strikes into forests and catch a fire, then they go get the fire because they basically don't know how to create fire yet, but they have fire. And what they have is this big conch looking thing, and inside is an ember that they keep lit all the time. And whenever they need to cook food or whatever, then they have this lamp kind of thing that they walk around with. And what happens is during the early part of the film is another tribe, it looked like Cro-Magnon man, attack them, and they end up running away, and they run into a swamp, and then that fire ember ends up being dunked in the swamp, and it goes out. So now they have no fire, and the tribe is going to die, right? So without fire, they're going to die. So what they do is they send off like, how many people was it? One, two, three. Is it four? I think it's four men from the tribe to go look for fire. So it's a quest for fire, right? So and then they end up coming into contact with a more advanced race, and then they learn how to make fire rather than having to go search for it, right? So anyway, so it's quite an interesting film, and for a non-dialogue film, it is really interesting because I know really brings you into that world where you can imagine this is like you know 30 or 40 or 50,000 years ago, or a million years ago, however long, when Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon man walked the planets and there wasn't a Homo sapiens yet, right? And you had saber-toothed tigers that are in this, and woolly mammoths are in this, right? And some parts of this film are freaking hilarious, all right, and other parts of it are really charming, and you kind of see it. I know it does a really, really, really good job, and if you have not seen A Quest for Fire, watch it. It's going to blow your mind, right? So I'm not going to tell you anything more about it, but it's from 1981, called Quest for Fire, directed by Jean-Jacques Annaud. It's number 87 on my list, and he has one other film that would make maybe a top 100 list, and that's called The Name of the Rose from 1986. But that's it from Annaud. All right, so that's number 87 from the list, and now number 86 is a film from director Michael Mann, and it's from 2004, and it's called Collateral. And this film is quite an impressive film. It stars Jamie Foxx and Tom Cruise. Basically, Tom Cruise is a hitman, and he comes into to this New York. Jamie Foxx happens to be a taxi driver that he takes, and basically he forces Jamie Foxx to drive him around the city because he has like 5 or 6 hits or 4 hits. I don't know how many. Uh, he has like 4 or 5 people that he needs to go kill, and he basically forces Jamie Foxx to drive him around the city so that he can go shoot these people, right? All right. And it's if it was as simple, the film was as simple as that, it would be like almost like a B movie, right? But man directs it. I mean, the cinematography and the camera use and everything else is really great in this film because it takes place mostly at night, right? And but there's side stories, there's backstories, and then there's conversations between Tom Cruise and Jamie Foxx that are like, you know, think pieces like you would get in a Tarantino film where Tarantino talks about, like a virgin or talks about tipping or things like that. Well, in this film, you have conversations because even though Jamie Foxx is driving a cab, his dream is to have a limousine service that caters to all your needs or whatever, right? And it's a dream of his, and he's driving a cab to save up for it. And then, like there's a confrontation between the two of them, and Tom Cruise kind of teaches some things to Jamie Foxx while this is going along. But Jamie Foxx kind of knows in the back of his head that he may not survive this because after he drives him everywhere, he may, um, put a bullet behind his head so there's no witness on who he is, right? And there's another, and it gets even more complicated than that, where Jamie Foxx has to go into a club. And anyways, I don't want to get into the really gritty details of it, but it is really, it will, from the beginning to the end of this film, you will have your eyes stuck on this film, and you will watch it because it is an extremely interesting film, both action wise and psychologically wise. Mann did a really good job with this, and Mann is a great director. Other films of his that may make this list would be Thief from 1981, Heat from 1995, if you remember that, and The Insider, the Russell Crowe film from 1999. All three really good films, along with this one. But I think Collateral is probably his best film, and I rank it number 86 on my list. All right, from 2004. All right, so number 85 is an Italian film. It's from 1997. It's directed by Roberto Benigni, and it's called Life is Beautiful, or La Vita è Bella. All right, so this film is probably the last film that I've watched that has made me bawl out loud. It, I was, I watched it on a movie network back in the day, late at night. Had insomnia. I couldn't sleep, so I decided to put on the TV and I watched in this film. Said, okay, I'll watch this film. I seen Benigni in some films and I liked him, and this is one he directed. So I said, okay, I'll watch it. This is basically this is a two kind of like a two-part film. It's like two films in one, kind of like Titanic was two films in one. Where the first part of it is a romance from Jack, and I can't remember. Anyways, the romance with Leonardo DiCaprio in the first half of the film, and then the second half of the film, it's a disaster movie. So the first half is a romance, the second half is a disaster movie, right? So this one is kind of a similar thing. The first half of this film is like a romance film, and then the second half of this film is like a tragedy. All right. So basically, this film tells about Roberto Benigni, who falls in love with this woman, and but she's kind of like engaged or involved with another man, and he romances her away from that man. And it's such a beautiful, the scenes in it are beautiful and charming, and they make you laugh. And so they end up getting married, and they end up having a son. And then what happens is World War II starts, and uh, here comes the German Nazis, and Benigni is a Jew, and so they take him into custody and put him in a concentration camp with his son. All right. Now he doesn't want his son to realize what horror is happening, so he tricks his son, convincing his son that this is a game, and that if he passes this game, this is a very complicated game, and if he passes this game, he'll get to ride on a tank. All right. He has always wanted to ride on a tank. So basically, you go through the whole first half of the film, which is the romance and the marriage, and then the second half of the film is in the concentration camp, him tricking his son so that his son is not having a shitty life, right? And he goes about doing everything, and I don't want to ruin the film, but it gets really sad by the end of this film. But overall, it's a really great film. But I would have difficulty watching this film over and over again. I think I've watched it twice, and the second time was almost as bad as the first time that I watched it, emotional wise. So this is one of those films that is great, but be you may not be able to watch it more than one or two times because it's just too emotional, right? So that is Life is Beautiful from Roberto Benigni from 1997, and it's number 85 on my list. All right, so that is, and Benigni doesn't have any other films that reach that mark. Number 84 on the list is a film by John Schlesinger, and this film has a scene in it, the dentist scene. Is one of the most brutal scenes I've ever seen in my life. It's like that cringe-worthy scene that just sticks the hair up on the back of your neck, and you get that feeling going down your spine. It's like, ugh, and that's what makes this film great. Now, I don't know because it seems that when I watched the film originally, that scene was like a long scene and a really difficult scene, like fingernails against a chalkboard. And then I watched it more recently, and the version of the film that I got then, that scene was very short, and I think they cut that scene because it was just too intense. I don't know. So I may be incorrect in that. Maybe I'm because the when I first watched it, back when I was a teenager, the next time I watched it was like 30 years later, right? So I could be wrong. Maybe it's the same film, but no, they got to have edited it. That's the only thing I could think of, right? Because the next time I watched it, I'm going, did they do something with that scene? Because there's something different with that scene. Anyways, this film stars so this film stars Dustin Hoffman and Laurence Olivier and Roy Scheider. All right, so basically, Dustin Hoffman, who plays Babe, his name is Babe, his nickname is Babe. He's a long distance runner. He's a marathon guy, right? And he has an older brother who ends up getting involved with a Nazi because this Nazi, all right, he was like one of the big names at the the execution camps and the at Auschwitz and that they called him the butcher or whatever, and so he's basically a war criminal hiding out, and during the war he stole uh, diamonds from the Jews, and he wants to bring them to the United States to sell them or whatever to get money or whatever, right? Um, so he's wanting to come to the United States. Now he had a brother that he was going to get to do it because he didn't want to set foot in the United States and be captured, right? But his brother ends up getting killed, so he has to do it himself. So he sets up a meeting with Babe's older brother, who's played by Roy Scheider. Now the butcher guy is the Laurence Olivier character, right? So Laurence Olivier was a Nazi uh, Jew killer who stole diamonds, wants to come into the United States and bring all these diamonds into the United States, and he wants to know if it's safe to bring it in or not. Because what happens is Roy Scheider ends up getting killed, and the Laurence Olivier character looks at Babe or the Dustin Hoffman and thinks that maybe his brother told him something about this, and he doesn't know if it's safe or not. So what he does is he captures Dustin Hoffman, and and Laurence Olivier is a dentist by trade, and then he tortures Dustin Hoffman using, dental instruments on his teeth, right? And that is the cringiest scene. That is one of the, the most difficult scenes that you'll ever see on film. All right, to watch that scene, it's up there with some of the most powerful scenes. The Russian roulette scene from The Deer Hunter. The axe through the bathroom door. Here's Johnny's scene from The Shining. Just those certain scenes, right? The this is my gun. My gun is my best friend. This is Full Metal Jacket, man. From Full Metal Jacket, Stanley Kubrick film. Anyways, there's some powerful scenes that are out there. This is one of them, right? And once you see this scene, you'll never unsee it, all right? But basically, he tortures Dustin Hoffman to see whether it's safe to bring the diamonds in or not, right? So, and then it goes from there. But yeah, it's a really powerful film, and I think it's Schlesinger's best film. But he has done Midnight Cowboy from 1969, The Day of the Locust from 1975, and The Falcon and the Snowman from 1985. Those three films could make a top 100 list as well. But my choice would be Marathon Man because that scene itself and the story of it, how Nazi criminals are still around even after the Nuremberg trials and all of that, they're hiding out. They have all this stolen stuff from the Jews, and uh, yeah, it's a really powerful film. All right, so that is number 84. So next up is the film Tenebra from Dario Argento from 1982, if I remember correctly. Yes, all right. And this is an Italian giallo film, basically a horror mystery thriller type of film that Argento popularized, and Tenebra is one of the greats of that subgenre. It basically tells a story about an author who writes horror fiction, and a killer who takes that horror fiction and puts it into effect, right? So, and then the author joins up with the police to go find this killer, right? So, any of Dario Argento's films are good, but you have to have an open mind because they're not like Hollywood slick type of films. They're Italian giallo films and that kind of thing. So, if you can do that and you can get it in, it's like watching a Roman Polanski film. It's just a little bit different, right? So you got to get your head around the little bit of that difference. It's like reading a modern novel and then reading a Shakespeare play, right? The language is just different, but the greatness is there. You just have to get over that hump first, right? So Argento's films are just a little bit different, and if you can get around that and watch the film and realize how great it is, then yeah, you're going to enjoy all of Argento's films once you make that jump, just like with the Polanski films, right? So at least some of the Polanski films. So this basically, like I said, it's a killer who uses these horror novels that this writer writes as inspiration to commit crime, right? So investigate Dario Argento. A lot of his stuff is really good, right? Now he has Tenebra, but like I said, there's other ones like Deep Red from 1975, Suspiria from 1977, Inferno from 1980. All right, so that's Tenebra from 1982, directed by Dario Argento. Next up after that is another horror comedy, one of my favorite types of genre, and this is directed by Sam Raimi from 1992, and it's Army of Darkness. Now you have three films in that trilogy, the Evil Dead trilogy. You have Evil Dead from 1981 and Evil Dead 2 from 1987, and this Army of Darkness from 1992. But Army of Darkness, I approached and watched before I watched Evil Dead 1 or 2. So it became my favorite, and I think it's the better of the three films. It's extremely funny, all right, and the effects in it are quite good. Bruce Campbell, is just Bruce Campbell, right? He's just made for these films, right? So, and if you haven't seen any of the three films, maybe watch Evil Dead first, then Evil Dead 2, and then Army of Darkness, or just watch Army of Darkness because you don't really need to watch the other two films to watch Army of Darkness. It seems like Army of Darkness is an add-on at the end of the first two films, like Evil Dead 1 and 2 are kind of together, and then Army of Darkness is kind of like an extra one that they decided to make later. But it is quite hilarious. It's quite a funny horror film, right? So any of the three films are good, and those are the three films that you could put in the top 100 list. Other stuff by Raimi, he did the Drag Me to Hell, and he did the Spider-Man films, but I don't know. I don't think those reached the height of the Evil Dead trilogy, right? So, right. So that's number 82, Army of Darkness. From 1992, directed by Sam Raimi. Next up after that is number 81, and this is a John Carpenter film from 1981, and it's called Escape from New York, and it's my all-time favorite Carpenter film. Carpenter has made some great films, but I really like this one. The the correlation between Kurt Russell and John Carpenter is like a magical formula that makes great like B movie style films, right? And they really have a I don't know, they have an attraction to them that, there's just some sort of magic that's going on screen that, you know, is just fun to watch, right? Basically, Escape from New York is Kurt Russell plays this, what is he? He's like an ex-military tough guy kind of thing. His name is Blixen, and he gets coerced. He's a prisoner in jail or whatever, and he gets coerced into going into New York, which has become a penal colony. The island of Manhattan is surrounded by a big wall, and all the criminals are thrown into Manhattan, and it's basically a prison island. And unfortunately, the president of the United States ends up crash landing inside Manhattan, and so the government brings Blixen out of prison and says that if he can go into New York or into Manhattan and save the president, that his sentence will be commuted, right? So he goes in to New York on a glider and lands on top of the one of the twin towers or whatever, and then he goes down and goes into New York to go find the president. Right? It's quite a fun stylistic type of film, and Carpenter is really good with that kind of thing. There was a sequel to it, Escape uh, from L.A., but that wasn't as impressive. It was fun to watch as well. That surfing scene didn't make any sense, but and it was kind of stupid, but it was kind of funny as well in that second film. I'm saying, but he has so many good films. A lot of people wouldn't pick this film. A lot of people would pick some other films like maybe Halloween or others by him. Thing maybe. He has a lot of great uh, films. So John Carpenter's 1981 film Escape from New York, but like I said, he could have, let's say, Assault on Precinct 13 from 1976 or Halloween from 1978, The Thing from 1982, Big Trouble in Little China from 1986, or They Live from 1988. Any of those films as well. If you took out Escape from New York and put any of those films in, uh, it would be fine as well, right? So, all right, so that is uh, John Carpenter's Escape from New York from 1981. It's number 81 on the list. Next up is a film called The Happiness of the Katakuris from 2001. And this is directed by Takeshi Miike. And Takeshi Miike is one of modern Japan's best directors. And he is a demon. I mean, he puts out movies like really quick, and some of them are crap. They're not all that great. But then he hits the magic and he makes a film like this one or Dead or Alive or Itchy the Killer, 13 Assassins, that type of film. Like I don't know, he's made over 100 films, and maybe 20 of them are like, you know, good, and maybe three or four of them are great, right? But he just puts them out, and when he does hit it right, and his films are kind of freaky. They're just off center. You wonder about his sanity when you're watching his films. If you sat down and watched a whole bunch of Takeshi Miike films one after another, you would wonder if Takeshi Miike is sane, because some of the stuff that he thinks up to put on film is just like, what the F? You know what I mean? Like, really? I mean, anyways, this one, this film is about a family who buys a hotel because they think they're going to make a lot of money by buying this hotel, because the government is going to put a highway going right by this hotel that's in the middle of nowhere, right? And the father thinks he's going to make a bunch of money because of it. But then what happens is they find out that this hotel is kind of haunted. All right, like it's a bad luck hotel. Bad things happen in this hotel, right? And the highway isn't going by it. All right, and but there's a whole bunch of things that happen in the hotel that are kind of you know got that bent sense of humor that Mike is famous for, like the marriage between the girl and the sumo wrestler. That scene in the bedroom, black comedy at you know at its height. It is. I laughed and laughed and laughed at that part, and the whole film is funny. But that scene there is like, really, my God, it just it's so wicked that it puts a smile on your face. It's really funny. So if you haven't watched any of Mike's films, pick up ones. The ones that you want to get though are, like I said, The Happiness of the Katakuris, which is this one from 2001. But he has Dead or Alive from 1999, another really good film. Itchy the Killer from 2001. That one is weird at the most, and it's about the Japanese yakuza. And there's one character in that film that's going to blow your mind. Anyway, so and 13 Assassins from 2010 is another good one by Mike. All right, so The Happiness of the Katakuris from 2001. Um, Directed by Takeshi Miike, and it's number 80 on the list. All right, so next up is number 79. And this is a Mel Brooks film from 1974, and it's Blazing Saddles. And it's basically, um, Mel Brooks is like the 70s and 80s Edgar Wright, right? So Edgar Wright made Shaun of the Dead, which is like a farce or a play on the zombie genre, and then he made that buddy cop film, um, which was a play on a buddy cop film, right? It's a comedy, a farce of that type of film. So he's kind of playing fun with different genres of film. Then he directed that one, which is like the end of the world type of film. Anyway, so well, Mel Brooks did it first. All right, Mel Brooks did Blazing Saddles, which is a you know a satire or farce on the Western film. Then he did one about space called Spaceballs. He did one about the historical film called The History of the World Part One. He did a whole bunch of different films like the horror with Young Frankenstein. Anyways, out of all of those films that he did, all these parodies and comics, comic playoffs from different genres of films, Blazing Saddles is the best. All right, and it's from 1974, and it basically tells the story of a town that ends up hiring a black sheriff, right? And it goes on from there, and it is extremely funny. All right, I don't know if that would be able to be made today, but when it was made in the 70s and I watched it in the 80s, I laughed my ass off. All right, and I think it still holds that type of humor. But like I said, Brooks has other films like Spaceballs from 1987, which is his playoff of Star Wars or science fiction movies, and Young Frankenstein from 1974, which is a playoff, the horror films, right? So, but Blazing Saddles is his best film. All right, so that's Blazing Saddles, number 79 on the list, directed by Mel Brooks. All right, next up is another of my all-time favorite films. And this is directed by Walter Hill, and it's called The Warriors, and it came out in 1979. And this film is it's like a great premise for a film, and it's like pulled off about 90%. It could have been better because if you think about it, this might ruin the film for you, but if you think about it, okay, so basically the premise of this film is there's a gang in New York. It's the largest gang in all of New York, all right? And the head of it, the head of that gang is his name is Cyrus, and he calls on a meeting of all the major gangs in New York to come to a park in the Bronx to have a meeting. All right, and basically it's what was it like 9 delegates, no weapons, come to this park. And basically what Cyrus wants to do is join up all the gangs of New York together and run the city. All right, but there's this um, one of the gangs that end up showing up is led by a crazy guy, and he takes a gun and he shoots Cyrus. All right, and nobody knows exactly who shot him, but what he does afterwards is he blames the leader of another gang from Coney Island called the Warriors, and he blames them. It was the Warriors who shot Cyrus, and then uh, they lose a delegate who's the head of the leader of their gang when he ends up getting killed. And then the police arrive at the park to arrest everybody, and then all the rest of the Warriors smash through a fence, get out of the park. They end up in a cemetery, and then they end up going, and then they realize whether the ceasefire is on or whether the truce between the gangs is on because they're way in the Bronx and they have to get back to their own territory in Coney Island. And is the is the truce still on? So what they got to do is they got to quote unquote bop their way all the way back to Coney Island. So that's what they do, and it's basically them fighting the rest of gangs of New York, getting back to Coney Island. But when you think about it, it's a good idea, premise for a movie, but if they knew it was the Warriors, the biggest gang, why would they want to, basically they get on, there's this radio station in New York that is a gang radio station, and basically the big gang ends up telling the DJ that's on it to have all the other gangs in New York look out for the Warriors and kill them if they can find them, right? So basically they bop their way through each of the territories to get back to the Bronx. But if you think about it, all they would have to do is just let the Warriors go back to the Bronx and then invade the Bronx. Or sorry, let the Warriors go back to Coney Island and then just wait for them in Coney Island, right? So there's a climax at the end of it, and all the gangs are hunting out for the Warriors, and they got to fight their way through everything. Anyways, it's quite an enjoyable film in that visceral type. You know, movies are great. Visceral movies are really good, and this gang film is an extremely good film if you haven't seen it. All right. Now, Walter Hill has a few other films that are really good as well that could make a list, and those are Southern Comfort from 1981 and 48 Hours from 1982. 48 Hours is a the Eddie Murphy film. It's really good, and actually, is it Jason Remar? I'll put his name down here. He plays the bad guy in 48 Hours, doesn't he? And he's one of the gang members in the Warrior gang members. He's the tough guy in the Warrior gang, in the Warriors in the Warrior film, right? So anyway, so that's number 78 on the list. The Warriors, directed by Walter Hill, and it's from 1979. Right. All right. Next up on the list is number 77, and it's The Day the Earth Stood Still from 1951, directed by Robert Wise. And I think this is Robert Wise's best film. It's most interesting. I like science fiction a lot, more than drama, but this basically is about an alien spacecraft that comes down to Earth because the guy inside it, his name is Klaatu, is a gift for the President of the United States. But what happens is that gift gets shot at from a nervous soldier, and then stuff goes on from there. And basically, Klaatu is like an alien who tells Earth that if they don't stop all their violence, that they may be eliminated, right? And but it's more complicated than that, and it's more adventurous than that, right? So, but overall, it's a really good story, and they made a remake of it. It's not as good as the original. If you want to watch either the remake or the original is better. Robert Wise is one of the great, the 1940s, 1950s directors, right? So, and The Day the Earth Stood Still is one of his best films. Now, there are others. The Setup from 1949, West Side Story, obviously you know that one, from 1961. The Sound of Music from 65, another one that you probably know, and The Andromeda Strain from 1971. Any of those films that would make this list, I have no issue for. All right, so that's The Day the Earth Stood Still from Robert Wise from 1951, number 77 on the list. Number 76 is a Hong Kong film, and it's directed by Andrew Lau, Y. Kang, and Alan Mack. All right, and it's Infernal Affairs, and it's from 2002. And this film is one of the great Hong Kong action films, all right? And it basically tells the story of a criminal who becomes a cop, and a cop who is actually a criminal, works for the Yakuza, right? Basically, this is the film that Martin Scorsese basically took to make The Departed, the Leonardo DiCaprio Matt Damon film where Matt Damon plays a cop, but who's actually, in with the Irish mob, and Leonardo DiCaprio is like an undercover cop in the Irish mob who's like investigating the Irish mob, right? So in Boston. So basically, take that, put it in Hong Kong, and it's the Yakuza rather than the Irish mob, and you have Infernal Affairs, and you have the original, the one that Martin Scorsese took to make The Departed, right? It's a really great film. It's actually a trilogy, but the first film is the best out of the three. The other two just add on, right? So if you watch Infernal Affairs, you're going to be blown away. It's one of the great Hong Kong action films, especially if you haven't watched The Departed yet. It's really good. Anyway, so that's number 76, directed by Andrew Lau, Y. Kuang, and Alan Mack, Infernal Affairs from 2002. They don't have any other films that I would put in the top 100. So next up after that is number 75, and it's directed by Tony Kaye, and it is American History X. Remember when I talked about that dentist scene from Marathon Man? This has a scene in it as well that's just as freaky. All right, so but basically this stars Ed Norton, and he's basically a neo-Nazi skinhead, and this film is about him indoctrinating his younger brother into that type of idea, but then he realizes that his ideology is actually incorrect. All right, but there's a scene in it where Ed Norton takes by force a black man, puts him on the ground, puts his face up against the curb of the sidewalk, and then smashes his head into it and breaks all the the African American's teeth. Right, so it's a very brutal scene, and you'll never forget that scene when you see it. And this is a very brutal movie, all right. But basically, there's a moral to it, as in he's a skinhead. He's been indoctrinated into that ideology, and he gets himself out of it because he realizes that it's wrong, right? Okay. So that's Tony Kaye only has one other film. That's Lake of Fire from 2006 that could make a list like this, right? But it's American History X that is his best film, and it's from 1998. So Tony Kaye, American History X, from 1998. All right, next up is number 74 on my list, and this is my all-time favorite Canadian film. It's directed by Adam McGoyan, and it's called Exotica, and it's from 1994. Adam McGoyan, I believe, is Canada's greatest director. There's a lot of Canadian directors that have left Canada to go to Europe or to the United States to direct. Adam McGoyan basically came to Canada and is directing in Canada, right? So a lot of his films, well, I believe he's the greatest Canadian director, right? So, and Exotica is his best film from 1994. Okay, so Exotica tells the story. Actually, it tells multiple stories. The main characters in it is a group of people that work in a strip club in called Exotica in Toronto. You have the DJ, then you have the main stripper, Mia Krishner's the actor, and then you have the owner, who's a pregnant lady. But then you also have the story of a pet shop owner who likes to import illegal animals, eggs, and things like that into Toronto through his pet store, right? And then there's some other things also going on, but there's like these different stories that go along that seem to be totally undirected to each other, like independent of each other, right? But slowly what you're seeing is scenes involving these different characters slowly coming together, and at the end you see what all of those characters are, and those storylines, they all merge into one. And it's really, this film is meant to be watched twice, like once and then watched right again afterwards. And basically the first time you're watching it, it's kind of like disjointed. You're trying to figure out what's going on, why are they telling me this and then this and then this, because they don't seem any relation to each other, right? And then at the end you go, oh, and then it all comes together. And then you press rewind. Well, you don't anymore. You just restart the film or whatever, and watch it again, knowing the ending, and then you see the film in a whole different light, right? So it's like two films in one, and it's a really good film, all right. And if you can, like I said, toughen up to being able to push through the beginning of the film where these different stories don't match up with each other. If you can get through that confusion to the end of the film, you'll enjoy the first time you watch it because of the ending of the film. And then the second time you watch it, you'll really enjoy it as well, knowing the ending of the film, and then you see all these things and how they're related because you didn't realize before, right? So all right, so that's Exotica from 1994. Now, Adam McGoyan has directed a number of really good films that could make this list. The Sweet Hereafter from 1997 is another one. Felicia's Journey from 1999 is another one. Ararat from 2002, and Where the Truth Lies from 2005. Any of those films, I would have no issue making this list. All right, so next up is number 73. It's a Terry Jones film. It's a Monty Python film. It's called The Meaning of Life. And this film, when I watched it, I laughed my head off, especially in two sections of this film. Well, it's actually one big huge scene, but I laughed my head off the most in that scene. Well, there's another, yeah. Anyways, basically, this film is about the meaning of life. All right, and the film is supposed to tell you what the meaning of life is, right? But it's Monty Python, so it's going to be farcical and humorous, right? I mean, the restaurant scene where the piano player is singing a song about his penis is really hilarious, and then it moves over to this very large man who eats everything on the menu, and he's like big, and then the maitre d' or whatever says, would you like a mint? And then it goes from there. One of the grossest scenes I've ever seen in my life. That made me laugh hilariously. And there's another scene where after that, the maitre d' or waiter from that restaurant, talks to the camera because they're talking. You're wanting to know what the meaning of life is, aren't you? And then the camera goes up and down and says, yes. Okay, follow me. So he takes them on a journey and he says, oh yeah, yeah, just come. And it's like they're walking for an hour, right? In the film, but the film it might be 5 minutes or whatever, right? But it seems like a really long time. He keeps come, and they're walking. They walk out of the city. They walk into the country. They walk into this forest, and then they come to a clearing in the forest, and there's this house in the forest, and he says, "See that house?" He says, "That's where I was born, and that's where I grew up." And then the camera goes, and that's the meaning of life. He doesn't say it, but then the maitre d' or the waiter looks at the camera, knowing that the camera says, "You brought me all this way just to show me that," kind of thing. And then he says, "Oh, what? Well, fuck you. Okay, fuck you." Like that. Fucking hilarious. Anyways, Monty Python's humor is quite funny. So this is out of like they also Monty Python and the Holy Grail and Monty Python's Life of Brian, both directed by Terry Jones as well. I could make this list, but out of all the Monty Python films, the meaning of life I found the funniest, right? So I put that one in, and that's number 73. Terry Jones, The Meaning of Life from 1983. All right, so next up at number 72 is a Darren Aronofsky film from 2000. It's called Requiem for a Dream. This is one of the most cringe type of films that you can watch. Some of the scenes in this film are just like, you want to close your eyes to. All right, so basically, this is a drug film about drug addiction, all right? Both prescription and illegal. And basically, there's a story of three kids who basically all get addicted to drugs and what they end up doing in order to continue using drugs, right? And Aronofsky gets really brutal, all right? So, like, what's his name? Uh, Jared Leto is one of the guys. So Jared Leto, Jennifer Connelly, and Marlon Wayans are all friends, and what they want to do is they want to sell drugs for a living to get a big score. But what they end up doing is getting hooked on smack or whatever the drug is. And Jennifer Connelly goes through a bunch of porn shit and gets degraded and gets raped and everything in order to continue her addiction. And Jared Leto, which is one of the grossest scenes in the whole thing, is he gets from the injection site in his arm, it gets infected and it turns black, and you can see the gangrene or whatever, and his arm is dying, and he's still injecting more drugs into his arm, right? And then he loses his arm because of it, all right? But the most powerful, at least in my opinion, of this film is the Ellen Bernstein part of it, where she wants to fit into a red dress for, I think it's her son's wedding, or no, she's getting an award for something. Anyways, I can't remember the exact reason. It's been a while since I've seen this film. It came out in 2000, so it's like over 20 years old. But she starts taking speed, like prescription speed to lose weight. It's like the doctor sells her on it will help her lose weight so she can fit into the dress. But then she gets addicted to it, right? And then she goes through a nasty addiction, and you watch it, and she's not a young woman, she's an older woman, and this is prescription drugs, all right? This isn't illegal drugs, right? And you can see how that could translate into real life very easily. Or you go in because of surgery of some sort, and then they end up giving you a narcotic as a painkiller, and then you get addicted to that narcotic, and then your life spirals out of control. That's what uh, is Ellen Bernstein character, and you could tell that she was older at the beginning of the film, but she's pleasant looking by the end of the film. She just looks like 30 years older than she already is, right? It is a very brutal film. I wouldn't recommend you watching it actually, to tell you the truth, but if you end up watching it, you will never forget that film, all right? That's how good Aronofsky did this film. And it definitely is an anti-drug film. I mean, I wouldn't suggest you let your children watch this film as a way to scare them off drugs, but it might work, but it also might traumatize them. You know what I mean? This is quite a brutal film. All right. fair warning if you're going to watch it. All right, so it's called Requiem for a Dream by Darren Aronofsky from 2000. And there's other films that Aronofsky has done that could make this list. Number one would be Pi from 1998. That one is a cerebral film that I got into, unlike The Seventh Seal. And that's about, pi as in 3.141, so on and so forth, right? And this guy that obsesses on that and he thinks it holds the secrets of the universe or whatever, right? So The Wrestler from 2008 is another film. Black Swan from 2010. And actually just recently, The Whale, if you haven't seen that film, um, from 2022. That film is really good. And Brendan Fraser, as a very obese, overweight man, does an Oscar-winning performance of that film, right? So I don't know if he's won the Oscar for it or not. I don't really watch those shows. So, all right, so that's Darren Aronofsky's Requiem for a Dream from 2000, directed by, number 72 on my list. All right, next up after that is the Alfred Hitchcock film The Birds from 1959. All right, so this one I could have put way higher. Alfred Hitchcock is the greatest director of all time. It could be him, could be Scorsese, it could be John Ford from earlier times. It could be like Stanley Kubrick. There's a core of great filmmakers, and Alfred Hitchcock is one of the greatest of all time, right? So, but out of all of his films, probably Psycho is the one that people put as his best film. And but I didn't choose Psycho. I chose The Birds because The Birds is the film that creeped me out the most. It's funny because when I was a teenager, I watched The Birds, and I went, "What a stupid film! Birds attacking you from the sky? What? Just grab them, snap their neck, and move on with your life, right? It's a stupid film. I don't understand this." But then, I had more experience, and then I watched this film in my 40s again, and it creeped the living shit out of me. It was like I could picture myself in the film and going, what would you do if birds decided that all humans were their enemies? Because there's just thousands and thousands of birds, right? And they all have the advantage because they can fly over you. What do? You run inside. You can't go outside, otherwise you're attacked. It's just a freaky film. It like gives you what my generation would call the heebie-jeebies. That film, right? So I decided that film is probably my favorite Hitchcock film, even though, he has so many great films like Rear Window or any of the other ones. Actually, let's list all the films that could make it in this top 100 list. He's one of the main reasons why I made the rule as in only one film by one director, because you could put like so many of Hitchcock's films in a top 100 list, it would take over the list, right? So the 39 Steps from 1935 could have made this list. The Lady Vanishes from 1938, Rebecca from 1940, Shadow of a Doubt from 1943, Notorious from 1946, Rope from 1948, Strangers on a Train from 1951, Dial M for Murder 1954, Rear Window from 1954, Vertigo from 1958, North by Northwest from 1959, and Psycho from 1960. Any of those films could have made this list very easily. All right, so, but the one that I put was The Birds, directed by Alfred Hitchcock from 1959. All right, next up is one of the great slasher films, maybe the start of this of the slasher film horror film, and that's Black Christmas, directed by Bob Clark. All right, so um, I just mentioned Psycho. So basically, the biggest films that sold the most and were the most entertaining of the late 1970s and the 1980s were slasher films in the horror genre. Were slasher films. You had Freddy Krueger from A Nightmare on Elm Street. You had Jason from Friday the 13th, and you had Michael Myers from the Halloween films from John Carpenter, right? So those films started in 1978 with Halloween. Now Halloween hit it big, and then you had the competition, right? So, and that was Friday the 13th and uh, a Nightmare on Elm Street. But where did that type of genre start? So historians started looking back And what they found was, well, the John Carpenter film from 1978 is what exploded the genre, right? So they looked before 1978 and they came to Black Christmas and they said Black Christmas, that's probably, the modern start of the slasher film. And that's directed by Bob Clark and that tells the story of a, sorority house and this peeping Tom type of slasher killer who, the camera follows you around, follows him around like you're looking through this killer's eyes and he's peeking through windows and everything and then finally goes in and starts slaughtering people, right? It's a pretty intense film. But then you could also go back to 1960 and Psycho because Anthony Perkins has a knife, dresses up as his mother, and kills that woman with a knife in the shower, right? So that is basically a slasher attack, right? So you could maybe point to Alfred Hitchcock from 1960 Psycho as the start of it, but a lot of people say, okay, yeah, but that's not really, that's not a full-on slasher film, you know what I mean? Like Black Christmas was. So a lot of people note that maybe Black Christmas is the start of the modern slasher film, right? So Black Christmas from 1974 is number 70 on the list. But Bob Clark has a couple other films that, like my all-time favorite comedy film, like sex teen comedy film, is Porky's, and he directed that. That's from 1981. Totally, like un-PC film as they come. That film would not be able to be made today, but it inspired all the American Pie films. Basically, American Pie can go back and thank Porky's for the idea because Porky's is where it originated, right? That comedy that gets gross as well as funny and sexual in nature, right? Which is what American Pie is, right? So American Pie just puts it to a higher level. And A Christmas Story, the film about the little kid who wants that rifle for Christmas, is another charming story, right? Christmas Story from 1983. So those are the three films by Bob Clark, and Bob Clark's a Canadian director as well. So next up is number 69 on the list, and it's a Bryan Singer film called The Usual Suspects from 1995. And this is one of those great mystery slash crime films. And basically, it's crime happens, the police go pick up all the usual suspects, bring them into jail, and interrogate them all, and then you know Singer ends up going through the chronology, you know, of what's happening through the film, right? So, but basically, what made this film is that twist at the end with the Kevin Spacey character, right? That made the film, and the whole film is, really good. It's like a neo noir, basically, and it's like all the bad guys, and there's no good guys in this film, right? So it's quite impressive. I don't think any other of Bryan Singer's films reach the level of The Usual Suspects, and I don't think any other of his films I would rate in the top 100, top 130 film list. But The Usual Suspects, if you have not seen that film, that's one of the great films of all time, great crime films of all time. Watch that film, you'll really enjoy it. All right, next up after that is a Don Siegel film from 1971. That's Dirty Harry. Everybody knows that film, right? Clint Eastwood film about a bad cop in San Francisco who takes on this guy. What was he called? The Scorpio. He would blackmail the city of San Francisco for thousands of dollars because he'd kidnap a whole bunch of kids on a bus, and Dirty Harry has to go institute his form of justice and bring that character uh, down, right? So he's basically the tough guy cop that doesn't play by the rules and just goes out and shoots people if they need to be shot, right? So, and there's like five Dirty Harry films, this one, and then The Enforcer, and it goes on from there, right? So, anyways, there's a group of them, but the first film is the best out of all the films, and it's Eastwood became famous with spaghetti westerns, starring in films directed by Sergio Leone, right? The Italian spaghetti western films. And then he would do films on his own as well, or direct some western films. So that character, that tough guy character with a gun, he translated it in the 1970s from as the western genre was kind of coming to an end and the cop films were kind of becoming more popular. He translated the character from a gunslinger into a tough cop, right? But it's basically the same character, and it's an enjoyable character. I mean, he's played that character for all of his career, right? So, and you just love it all the way up to Gran Torino. He played the same character in Gran Torino, right? And but you love Clint. He just does that character just so well, right? He's probably the only tough guy that says the word swell and you think it's cool, swell, right? Which he did in one of the Dirty Harry films, right? But this is the best out of all the Dirty Harry films, the first one from 1971, directed by Don Siegel. Now, Don Siegel has had some really good films, all right? Others that could make this list are Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1956, The Beguiled, which is another Clint Eastwood film from 1971, Charlie Barrick from 1973, and another film that I thought maybe I would put that one in, but Dirty Harry is just a little bit better. And that's the Charles Bronson film Telephone. And that film is really good as well. I don't know if you've ever seen that film. I don't have it on DVD. I can't find it on DVD. And I don't think it's ever been put out on Blu-ray. But trying to find the DVD used in my area, I've not been able to find it yet. So it's called Telephone in 1977. Any of those films put in the top 100, I have no issue with. All right. So next up is, remember I mentioned a person called Takeshi Kitano from Battle Royal. He played a teacher in Battle Royal. Well, he's also a director, and he directed a film from 2002 called Dolls, and it's one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen in my life. The cinematography in that film is second to none. It's one of the greatest visual films ever made. And Kitano was one of Japan's greatest actor directors, since like the 1990s or whatever. But if you haven't seen Dolls, it's basically the story doesn't matter. There's a storyline to it. There's very little dialogue in this film, so you don't have to worry about subtitles so much. It's basically a visual film, all right? And it's an emotional film, all done visually, all right? And you will be blown away by it, especially if this film could get onto 4K. My God, this will be it's one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen. All right, so it's called Dolls, and it's from 2002, and it's directed by Takeshi Kitano. Now, Kitano has other films that could make a list as well. A Scene at the Sea from 1991. All right, Sonatine from 1993. Fireworks from 1997. Kikujiro from 1999. And lastly, and this was the first film that I saw of his, was The Blind Swordsman Zatoichi from 2003. It's his version of Zatoichi. It's kind of like a modern update of all the Zatoichi films that you got coming out of Japan, earlier, right? So, and the scenes, the blood scenes in it were kind of weird to watch because they were all, CGI animated scenes. So it's a bit weird to get used to that film with those scenes, with the blood scenes, because there's no real blood. They're using CGI for the blood. It but the story is really good. Zatoichi is one of the great film characters from Japan. So any of the Zatoichi films are fun to watch, right? So all right, so that's Takeshi Kitano's Dolls from 2002, and I'm gonna stop it there. So we've done 33 films from 67 up to 99. And I think I'll take a break there because my throat is starting. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's starting to get pretty raw. And maybe we'll do this in 33s. So we did 31, the first video, 33 now, maybe 33 again, and then another 33 will bring us to number one on the list. All right, so that's Dolls 2002, number 67 from Takeshi Kitano, and we will take a break from here, and I'll see you in a second when I record the next section of this film. Of this video. All right. So you have a great day, and bye for now. I'll see you in a second. All right. Bye.